Well, my name is Donald Palmer. I'm a commissioner with the Election Assistance Commission, and we are here for Election Day 2024 state updates with election officials and experts across the country. And we are going to have a jam-packed um, hour and a half, if we may go a little bit over. My colleague and my friend, who I worked with at the Bipartisan Policy Center, who's now with AEI, my friend John Fortier, he's going to be here with us the entire hour and a half as we talk to election officials across the country, including EAC updates throughout that hour and a half or so. John.
Thanks for having me. And I know we have a rapid fire program today with many election officials getting the basics from all across the country.
Well, we've been monitoring what's been going on while we've been interviewing election officials today, but we haven't had a chance to really focus on some of the reporting that the EAC has had. So we're going to bring in Jay Phelps, who is one of our directors of the E-Step program, who's been monitoring what's been going on across the country generally, and obviously a lot because we have 50 states and territories. But Jay is also with the state of Indiana. And so Jay, welcome to this space. Welcome to this update. How are you today?
Well, good afternoon, Commissioner Palmer, John. Thank you both so much for having me, and doing very well. With election nerds, it's Christmas Day, so it's a very exciting time, and certainly a great time here at the Election Assistance Commission.
So tell us a little bit. The EAC has been tracking. The EAC and staff have been tracking sort of what's been going on across the country. What have we generally seen? Because we don't have a lot of time, but generally, what have we seen when it comes to machines or technology that has had some issues? Polling places sometimes don't open on time. Sometimes there's technology issues with electronic poll books. Give us a sense of what you've seen over the course of this morning and now as we enter the afternoon.
Well, absolutely. And let me just start by saying that, our EAC Chief Election Information Officer has led this, agency-wide effort of election monitoring, going really back to the mid-September when absentee voting first kicked off for the first few states. So we've been at this for a while, hundreds of different updates, news stories, and our stakeholders sharing some things with us. As far as today goes, as you pointed out, we have seen some of the, poll workers not showing up on time, some minor issues with, voting systems that have thankfully been worked out. And then also, we have to realize that with election technology, a lot of states are still implementing things like electronic poll books for the first time. In fact, I watched a really great video from Pennsylvania public media earlier that talked about several different counties around Pennsylvania that are showcasing new electronic poll books to their system and how that process worked. So you have to give some time for not only the election administrators and the poll workers to get used to those that new technology, but also voters. It may take a little bit to get used to the first time, but once they go through that process, I can attest, being a former county clerk that implemented electronic poll books in my county. It really is a seamless process and helps actually expedite the voting experience.
So one of the things that I think is important for the Election Assistance Commission is that one reason we monitor sort of the technology is that sometimes it's operator error, or it may be an error with the voting machine, but it may not impact the voting or casting, the counting of ballots. And so we want to make sure we can get the straight scoop to voters and make sure they understand what the issue is and what it isn't. How does your team approach the issue of technology failures, around the country, and reporting that to the commissioners and other stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a great question, and kind of with the election supporting technology evaluation program, jointly with the testing certification, division, we are just looking at different anomalies from around the country. and seeing what issues there are. As of right now, there hasn't been any major issues. I know going kind of back, all eyes are on Pennsylvania. There was one county that had did have a delay, so the polls were extended open until 10 p.m. in that particular county. But we do ask that not only do manufacturers that are a part of the testing certification process that have had their specific equipment tested and certified, that we would love to see some of those anomalies come through. Also, our stakeholders can also let us know of that as an agency, and then of course we can pass that along to our executive director and the commissioners for their awareness. And with eStep, we are a new program, so we're going through our first certified EPB with no ink, and so we hope to be able in the future have a lot more monitoring, a lot more anomaly reporting once those technologies become part of our certification process.
Now, I wonder if you could speak to the point that a lot of our new technology, e-poll books or registration systems that are live, they work really well and make things much smoother, but occasionally they have problems and they break down, and election officials need to have some sort of backup procedures. What would you say to election officials, to voters, about the types of backups they have, and thinking about the time difference in various process as these things as these kinks are worked out?
Absolutely. And I will say that election administrators, really beginning in 2016, especially in 2020 with the pandemic, they have become very familiar with contingency planning and all the different worst case scenarios that could go wrong with voting equipment, with technology. Maybe that's a power outage. Maybe that is equipment failure. But some best practices are really important to have, and that's where our clearinghouse subject matter division here at the EAC really reach the local and state levels to provide what is the best process to be able to make sure your equipment is election day ready. And I know as eStep, as a lot of these nuanced technologies are becoming more widely utilized, we want to be able to provide logic and accuracy testing. We talk about voting systems going through that public test, going through that that pre-test, but I think these other technologies need to as well. I also have heard some jurisdictions, even though it could be cumbersome, but to be prepared, and this is recommendations that I know the EAC has mentioned CISA and others, is to have paper backups with electronic poll books, for example. In large cities, that's a little bit more cumbersome. It's expensive. It's hard to have a list of every site. But if you're precinct based, it does become a lot easier. If you have a vote center where you can vote anywhere in that particular county, that's where the more issue lies. But having a lot of these contingency plans worked out and specifics on how a county would deal with them, I think is extremely important. And I will say that Indiana Secretary of State, a few years ago, actually worked on that and had a workshop with election administrators in all 92 counties to work on that. I know other states have as well. It's very vital because that helps to smooth out the process, and hopefully, if it's discovered in absentee voting, it could be worked out before Election Day.
Well, I wanted to point out that you've also served at the state level in a state election office, and so the role is a little bit more trying to put out fires, work with locals to make sure those small issues that arise that don't impact voters are not for very long. Anything of interest that you've seen from a state perspective that you may have picked up on?
I think it's interesting, right, to have both local, state, and now federal experience, and I've really loved the challenge of all three. I think from a state perspective, it's just being sure that the county clerks have all the resources that we need. And one of the major things that the Election Assistance Commission does is the HAVA funding and the money to be able to give to states that goes down to counties to purchase things like electronic poll books and to strengthen cybersecurity. And I can go on forever about that, on how Indiana has utilized those dollars very pragmatically. But that is one of the tools and resources, I think, that as we continue to look forward to elections, especially after we do a debrief of this election, is where were some of the issues? Was it because they didn't have enough funding to be able to provide for some of these technologies? And would Congress have an appetite in the future to put some more money towards those?
Well, I want to thank you, Jay, for joining us to give us a summary of what you're seeing and talking a little bit about the monitoring that you and others at the EAC are doing to sort of just monitor what's happening across the country and sort of be able to explain things. Thank you for coming to the space and talking to us about what you're seeing and explaining it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jay. Our first guest at the local level is going to be Carly Kopis, who is with Weld County, Colorado. John, you want to welcome her? I want to say that Carly is hi, Carly. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
Carly is a member of our LLC executive board, and she has done a great job in supporting the EAC, and we hope that we've been able to help her and other local officials, part of the local leadership council, that she's a part of the leadership. I'm going to turn it over to John for some questions.
Sure. I think, so since we don't have much time and people are really around the country wondering how voting's going everywhere, maybe just a little bit of a count of the basics of Colorado voting. Colorado voting is pretty well known. It's a model for other places, but especially what happened before today, election day. Lots has been happening. And then I think maybe Don will want to follow up and get to what's going to be happening when we start to get to the counting of the ballots and what we could expect.
Absolutely. Colorado, we've been seeing a very strong turnout in our hybrid mail ballot election. So we are primarily mail ballot, but we still have the flavor of in-person voting. We have been seeing a steady return during our early voting numbers throughout the state of Colorado. Just within the first 4 hours today for me in Weld County, we have received over 20,000 ballots, which is fantastic. So we are looking to hopefully get an 80% turnout, but we would love in Colorado to finally edge out Minnesota as the #1 return and turnout for voting, but we'll see what we can do this election. But that's what we're aiming for, at least try and get that #1 spot from Minnesota.
We have Minnesota coming on later. We like the competition here. This is good.
That's right.
So talk about a little bit about what kind of turnout you've seen and how people are voting. Is it primarily by mail or by ballot box? And how do you, once the polls close, how are you going to get those results out, and how are you going to work that certification process?
And when are we going to see those unofficial results? That's a question a lot of people are asking. Unofficial, we know.
Unofficial. Everything's unofficial until Thanksgiving, right? For us, we have primarily seen traditionally, not only Weld County, but the other counties in Colorado, we have seen a lot of people utilizing our secure 24-hour drop boxes. They are really using those this time around as well. We've seen a steady number of people use USPS, that early return. Most of them came through USPS. We're seeing a little bit of in-person uptick from 2020, but not as much as we kind of anticipated. So primarily Weld County and the state of Colorado, we still have been utilizing our 24-hour boxes to get those ballots back into us. Now, of course, we are going to have a huge onslaught like we always normally do on election day. And so Commissioner Palmer, what we are planning on doing is continuing to practice every one of our security steps and processes, checks and balances with our awesome bipartisan election judges that have been working diligently since 6 o'clock this morning here. Go ahead, receiving those ballots, getting those voter records marked as received, getting them over to our signature verification judges to verify those signatures against the signatures we have on those voters' record, handing them down over to the opening board to keep a constitutional right to a private ballot upheld, and then finally to our scanners who will then insert those into our scanning machines. And then our goal is at 7:10 p.m. tonight in Colorado is to release the first set of unofficial results on our county website and the state's election night results. So we're all hoping that we'll have something to report in Colorado shortly after 7 p.m. My goal is 7:10, and I know some other counties are as well.
So one last question before we move on. This is great to hear. There have been some, the issues in Colorado regarding the passport on some voting systems. Talk to me about why you're confident that in your voting systems, not only in Weld County, but across Colorado, what steps have you been able to take to remediate that situation?
Absolutely. This is where I cannot express how proud I am of the Colorado County Clerks Association and my fellow clerks in this state. Obviously, it was an unfortunate event with the Secretary of State's office having those BIOS passwords on their website for some time. Once we got notification, all of us have practice with EAC, TTXs, and local TTXs. So we were prepared because it's a scenario we have worked through. So we all started going through our next step out of our security procedures. So that is how we know our security posture at the local level is strong. So we have multiple different barriers to protect against anybody trying to use those BIOS passwords. We have the physical security, so access doors, video surveillance, all those features, along with the employees that are able to have access to them are background checked. And again, it's very limited who has access to those areas. On top of that, in Colorado, there are two separate sets of passwords. We have my passwords and then the BIOS passwords. So you have to have kind of both of those to be able, but the key aspect is you have to have that physical access to our equipment. And that's how we know in Colorado, and I know in Weld County, my fellow clerks, within 24 hours, we re-verified our video surveillance and reviewed all of it. We reviewed all of our access logs, and we made sure that our equipment was still secure and up to federal and state standards. So those are the certain steps that we took. We did work with the Secretary of State's office for those impacted counties and had them come in and change those BIOS. So even with those former now bio passwords being leaked, that's how we know that we can have confidence in the security of our elections moving forward throughout today and the following days that we're more than likely going to be counting.
Well, thank you, Carly. We really appreciate it. Good luck with the as we in the election day and the election season. And I want to thank you for your longtime service with the Election Assistance Commission, the Local Leadership Council. Thank you so much. And the voters of Weld County are very fortunate to have you.
Well, thank you so very much. I'm going to now put my top hat back on and get back to doing the dance of the election. Thank you, guys.
That's great. Awesome. So our next guest with
We have two people.
we have two guests. We have Ricky Hatch, who is the clerk of Weber County, and he's also on their local leadership council. So we have Ricky coming in from Utah, and we also have Thad Hall, who's with Pennsylvania, Mercer County. Thad Hall is the director of elections with Mercer County in Pennsylvania. He's also serving on our leadership board of the local leadership council. So Ricky, I saw that you were there to give us a little bit of insight into how the election process has been for Utah, and what is the turnout, and how do you expect the results to go tonight? Not the actual results, but the reporting results.
Thank you. It's going well. It is super busy, and that's part of why I was late. Is I'm out at our main vote center for the county. Utah is primarily a vote by mail state. As of last night, we were at 57% turnout from by mail ballots we've received, and a good chunk of folks have voted in person today. We have been extremely busy all day. From the very first, when we first opened, we had a couple hundred people in line at our main vote center, and the line has been consistent all day, and it's getting just a little bit bigger. So super busy. We anticipate about a 90% turnout of registered voters. And the lines are moving. The wait is about 15 minutes and has been almost all day. But we're coming through, and lots of excitement. Just super busy.
So I'm going to ask a question to Thad, but maybe that's one that we can also get Ricky to answer afterwards. So Thad, welcome. You look like you're in a cathedral, the Cathedral of Democracy, perhaps, with that window behind you. Thank you for joining us. You're in Pennsylvania, a state that many people are watching, a swing state, and people are really asking about how it's going to go in Pennsylvania and maybe how we're going to count. So a little bit of a sense of view for what's already happened in your county or in Pennsylvania in terms of the voting that went on before Election Day. But then especially I'd love you to comment on once we get to the closing of the polls, how's that counting going to go? I know that you and I and Don have talked before a bit, and I sense that you're a little more optimistic. Maybe I don't want to get you in trouble with your secretary, but I think the Secretary Schmidt has sometimes said maybe it will take a little longer. But I think you've given an account how maybe some of the smaller counties and maybe even the larger ones can count a little more quickly unofficially. So tell us
Right.
about the before process and what's going to happen later tonight.
Sure. So Pennsylvania is we're a rather retro state, unlike Ricky's very modern Utah. So we don't have early voting. We have over-the-counter mail voting, and we did have quite a few people who voted by mail in this election. And we've already counted all of our mail-in ballots, so we're done counting all of our mail-ins. My county is, I'm probably the 20th biggest county in the state, so all of the counties smaller than me, they're all done too. Most of the counties who are a little bit bigger than me, they're also, close to being done. The counties that have large numbers of mail-ins, they're going to be, places around Philadelphia and Allegheny. But even Allegheny, they count, they're counting 10,000 ballots an hour. I mean, they're very fast because they have so many teams working on this. And so I do think that, by midnight, you're going to see, most of the election results for Pennsylvania are going to be reported. Because, we're going to have all of our, all of our election day voters, and about 80% of the count of the people statewide are going to vote by, at the polls on election day. And so I think we're going to, you'll know pretty much how everything's going to turn out, unless it's super, super close.
So Thad, you've had the opportunity. Have you had any, and this is really for both Ricky Hatch and Thad Hall. Have there been any hiccups or issues, either with the process during the early voting period? I know there were some lines in Pennsylvania, but because it's an in-person absentee process, you have to fill out a form. It sort of lengthens the time that it takes to vote. Instead of a couple of minutes, it might take a good 10 to 12 minutes. What are some of the issues that you've seen during the early voting period, Thad, or into election day?
Mainly just we were flooded with people coming, especially toward the end of the process. People did wait till the last 4 days of early voting to actually early vote, which made it really fun. So it was an action-packed, 4 or 5 days right there at the end, right as we were prepping for election day voting. So it was pretty. But we didn't have any problems really.
Yeah, in Utah, the biggest problem really was lines, and even that wasn't too bad. I heard one county in the state had an hour-long wait, which that's no good. But for us, we had 2 lines when the voters come in. Usually the check-in line was very quick, 5 minutes, and we were checked in. But then to find a polling place or a voting booth, that was also a line because our ballot has 30 races on it, so it'll just take a while for voters to mark their ballots. But even that was probably 10 minutes tops. So lines have been a little bit of an issue, but not too bad. And no machine related issues that I'm aware of. It's really just the in-person turnout's a little higher than we anticipated.
So Ricky, just one question. Utah is usually seen as an all vote by mail state. How much in-person voting is there? Is it limited to election day and certain folks, or how much in person do you actually have? It seems that there are actually some voters that are taking advantage of election day voting.
Yeah, in Utah, on average, about 97% of voters vote by mail or drop box. 3%, 2.5% to 4% will vote in person. This year, I suspect we'll probably hit 5%. That's just a higher group of people that want to vote in person. But by and large, the state overwhelmingly and consistently votes by mail.
And quickly, how's your process going to go for counting the votes? How quickly do you think we were going to see unofficial results of lots of the votes in Utah?
Nice thing is when polls close tonight, unless there are lines that are keeping polls open, as soon as the last poll closes, then we release all of the numbers to date. And statewide, I suspect that that's going to be 60 to 65% of all of the votes that will be cast in this election. And since those are cast by mail, it's a very representative, statistically representative sample. And then usually by the end of the week, we're starting to get up into the high 80% or 90% because of the volume. We'll probably bleed over into next week. But I suspect by the middle of next week, we'll be at 99% of all ballots will have been counted and reported. And then Utah, they certify the results 2 weeks after election day.
Well, I want to thank you, Ricky, for joining us. Again, Ricky is serving the EAC he advises us. He's actually the incoming president of the board of advisors. So we can talk about that later, but thank you for your service to us and we appreciate that. And Thad, thank you for being on the local leadership council and reporting from Pennsylvania on how things are going there. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Good
Bye-bye.
luck, Thad. See ya.
Thank
Good
you.
luck with the rest of the day.
Thanks.
So we're bringing in now, we're going to talk with Doug Chapin, who is a friend of the Election Assistance Commission. He works with us and he's also worked with you, John, on a variety of projects. Doug, there you are.
Here I am.
So
And is that real Minneapolis behind you, or is that a background? I'm looking for the mittens and the earmuffs and stuff to keep you warm.
Yeah, well, it is definitely not this sunny today. It is not snowing, but it is not nice. So
okay. So just to properly introduce Doug, he is a senior research fellow at Forge March. Is that correct? And
that's right.
He's joining us today talking about all things Minnesota or Minneapolis from what he is seeing.
I've worked with the Humphrey School and at University
Absolutely.
of Minnesota, so I spent a lot of time there.
Yeah, and there's like a senior election certificate program it's a graduate program, correct? And so,
graduate and undergraduate.
yeah, some of the folks in the election community have been around for a long time, really attest to that certificate program. John, you want to start off the question?
Sure. Well, we're interested here on Election Day about what happened before Election Day. So maybe you could just give a little overview of Minnesota, the types of voting you allow before Election Day, and what you saw, what the sort of volume was. And then secondly, if you just want to transition into when the polls close in Minnesota, how are we going to see the counting going? All these different types of voting and thinking about how we're going to process them and at least get to a pretty high number of the unofficial count that people can say, I kind of know what happened in Minnesota.
Sure. Yeah. So like many states across the country, Minnesota did have a pretty robust pre-election day turnout. Latest numbers I saw suggest it's over 1 million voters cast their ballots before Election Day. You can cast a ballot before Election Day. Even though it's an early vote, it's technically, and it's an absentee vote. I cast mine that way. You fill out a form and cast an absentee ballot. But turnout was very strong. I have friends and family who all reported long lines, even at early voting or municipal or county voting sites before Election Day. Despite that, it looks like turnout, despite the rain here in the Twin Cities, looks like a pretty strong turnout. Reports are that poll workers are experiencing numbers that are more than they saw in 2016 or in 2020. Granted, 2020 was a pandemic year, but numbers do seem to be up at the polling place as well. Minnesota always vying for that #1 turnout in the nation, a friendly rivalry with lots of states. Actually saw an ad the other day during the NFL slate about Minnesota sort of luminaries exhorting their fellow Minnesotans to turn out and reclaim that #1 spot.
We had a Colorado election official challenging you to the
Yeah.
title earlier, just a few minutes ago. So
I have no doubt, and that'll be something that Secretary Simon and here in Minnesota and his colleagues can throw down about in person. But I do know it's a point of pride here in the land of 10,000 lakes. As far as what happens tonight, obviously, like any state, there are different procedures in different places. Some places will count the ballots at the polling place and then report those totals. Other places will tally up machines and then send those tallies to a central location. My understanding is that Minnesota doesn't take as long as other states because there is such a strong election day component, but also they're prepared to count those pre-election day ballots as well. So, I mean, I'm not going to make a prediction because one never knows what's going to happen. But I think in terms of shorter versus longer, that Minnesota is one of the states that's on the shorter end of the spectrum when it comes to tabulating and reporting unofficial election night totals.
Well, we want to thank you, Doug, for joining us. It sounds like things are going well in Minnesota. There been anything of note where there's been hiccups? The type of thing that we see all the time, but voters may not be aware of. Anything like that that has made the news?
I haven't. And actually, I know colleague Mindy Moretti earlier today over at Election Line. I've actually been struck. There were a couple of stories on the overnight roundup from Minnesota, but they were all forward looking, like what was going to happen today. Minnesota has not made any kind of appearance in the daily updates. You know, we've had a car crash into a polling place in New York. We've had some tabulation or some machine issues in places like Pennsylvania, concerns about check-in in Florida. None of that in Minnesota so far. Obviously, we're knocking wood. It can happen to anybody, but so far so good here in L'Etoile du Nord.
Thank you, Doug, for this update. You did mention the Florida issue. Apparently, the EVID system, which is like their electronic poll book system, went down. Now, if it was just one county, that's one thing, but I think they have like all the counties, all 66, there's 67 counties. They have 66 counties are under the EVID system. So
Spoken like a former Florida election director.
know who that
who's
might be.
glad that maybe he's not there today.
it's a little bit less stressful here at the Election Assistance Commission. Thank you, Doug, for joining us. And we're going to head down from the sort of not so great weather in Minnesota. We're going to go all the way down to Mississippi because we have the Secretary of State Watson here to talk with us about what's going on in Mississippi. Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, Doug.
So, Mr. Secretary, welcome to the EAC update from election officials. We're going all over the country. We're talking about how voters are voting. You've had the opportunity in Mississippi to go to polling places today. We got you on the tail end of that, so we are very grateful that you're able to join us. Thank you for joining us. What were your observations today? What's your big takeaway from visiting poll workers and voters as they cast ballots?
Yeah, I was really proud. And by the way, thank you for having me on here, Commissioner. I'm really proud of the work that we did between 2020 and 2024. Some of the changes we made legislatively, some changes we made within the office, within the statewide election management system, and then the training we did with our poll workers, with our circuit clerks, and with our commissioners. Really putting that work in on the front end has paid off today. Everywhere I've been, it's been smooth. We've had some long lines across the state. A lot of pictures coming in through my text messages. Folks showing me they're so proud of the great turnout. So excited about that. We had about a couple 100,000 absentee votes, which trails just by a touch 2020 turnout. But what is interesting to me about that, we had 10 counties that actually superseded those numbers from 2020. So it's interesting to see the different areas of the state that are having the higher turnouts versus some of the regular turnouts. But today, beautiful day so far. And again, long lines across the state. So we're excited about the turnout.
Now, maybe you can, you mentioned you do have some mail voting and of high numbers, but Mississippi is very much an election day voting state, lots of voting going on today. So maybe you can just say a little bit something about the balance of these things, but especially also, again, looking ahead to when the polls close. How are those votes going to be counted? What can we expect as you bring in the mail ballots from all the election day balloting, and how quickly and what's the process for what we'll see for those unofficial results to start streaming in tonight?
Yeah, great question. And mail-in's about 3%. Absentee, obviously, you'll see a little higher number with the 200,000 number, but those can be processed today. So we've got boards that are actually opening up those absentee mail-in indoor absentee votes that were cast at the circuit clerk's office. They will process those throughout the day. Do these count or not? Did they sign across the flap? Did they do everything they needed to do to have an accurate ballot? Those were then will be stored. They can't be counted until after 7 o'clock tonight. So those will be counted with our regular ballots. And we've got a really good process. I'm proud of. We put this, implemented this back in 2020. Typically, the absentee votes would actually be sent to all the precincts around the state. Now they are contained at the circuit clerk's office, processed throughout the day, and then counted obviously after 7 p.m. So that's kind of the how it works here in Mississippi. Bottom up state, the hard work in elections is done at the local level with our circuit clerks and our commissioners. They've done a phenomenal job, and all of our poll workers that I saw today, just went to thank them personally, shake their hands, look them in the eye, and look, we couldn't do it without them. Y'all both know that. But we've got a great process here, and I think we're going to have our returns ironed out pretty early in Mississippi.
So, Mr. Secretary, you're sort of at the state level. Have you, obviously that's a central place that where locals are having any sort of issue, then, you're going to be aware of it, become aware of it, maybe help them put out a local fire. Have you had any of those issues today or during the in-person absentee period?
Yeah, we've had a few. One was, we've got a few vendors in our state for the machines. The ES&S machine, that is the Express Vote ADA compliant machine. There was one issue where on the ballot itself, the presidential candidates were on one side and our U.S. Senate candidates were on the other side. And so folks, when they would vote for the Senate, would touch the left side, which would then triggered the presidential side, and they were saying the machine was switching their vote. Well, the machine was not switching their vote. It was a user error. We just had to explain to them, be very careful when you go watch this. And oh, by the way, on the back end, once you vote on these machines, they actually print out a ballot. You can look at the ballot, make sure that ballot was the vote that you want to cast, and then you put it into the scanner, which counts all of the ballots. So that we heard that a little bit early on. I saw today some pictures going around Facebook where there was a picture of a ballot and it had it almost looked like a pixel of a dot in one of the circles by one of the presidential candidates. And so people were concerned, well, hey, somebody got a hold of the ballots and they're putting a little dot in, so it's going to automatically switch my vote. No, I actually talked to the CEO, Tom, over at ES&S, asking them the questions about this. Come to find out, this was a one-off issue. We saw it in one of our counties. The circuit clerk went to the same precinct where this individual had voted, checked hundreds of these ballots. Not a single one of them had that dot. So it was just a rare occurrence there, but she was able to vote and cast her ballot, so that worked out fine. But little things like that you're going to see, and unfortunately, we've talked about this across these last couple of months. When you see there's reports on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever, I encourage people, reach out to your local election officials first. Because once you post that, somebody else is going to post it and repost it and repost it and say, hey, look what they're doing to us. Well, that was an absolute one-off accident. Saw another one that was actually a Kentucky ballot. So I reached out to Michael Adams. He said the same thing, not official. That's not something that's happening across our state. So it's little things like that sometimes happen that we have to answer head on, and we do to make sure that our voters have the confidence in the process. But we've heard a few of the small things around the state, but nothing really big, just an average election day. Actually, probably a little more quiet than normal.
Now, we talked about election day voting and some mail voting, but there also are maybe more in Mississippi than other states, people who are overseas or service members overseas sending in ballots. That's a little bit of a different process. Maybe you could walk through just what Mississippi is doing with those votes and how long they might take to come in, and what else you might say about this other important set of people who are serving our country overseas and yet want to make sure their ballots get into be counted.
Yeah, well, look, number one, thank them and thank God for them for making the sacrifices that they made to keep us safe, to keep us free, so we can have our voices heard at the ballot box. Number two, UOCAVA, very important for all of us across the country. And one thing I'll add to that, Mississippi actually added first responders to our UOCAVA provisions. So as y'all know, the hurricanes that have hit recently, we've had Mississippians go out to help. Those folks, too, are able to vote via the UOCAVA provisions, which is very important to us. But that has to be done by 7 p.m. today. The federal postcard application obviously is the first step. Once they request that, the circuit clerks will work with those voters, and then they can return the ballot by 7 p.m. today. So not a huge population of that here in Mississippi. Granted, we've got several military bases, so we do have a good bit of it. That said, our circuit clerks do a phenomenal job of getting that word out on the front end, making sure that they're explaining to these UOCAVA voters, hey, here's the process. Again, the federal postcard application is what starts it. They then work with the circuit clerk to get their ballots and their ballots returned. So I think it's been a great process here in our state. And again, I'm thankful for those folks who care enough to go fight and go represent us around this world to keep us free.
So Secretary Watson, we talked a little bit about the results tonight, how they're going to come out. I think we did an interview, we had a discussion about audits. And that sort of, you've added some new audits to Mississippi, working with the local election officials. Is that outside certification, before certification? I know that's sort of new to Mississippi that you and the legislature have brought in. Talk to us a little bit about that audit process.
Yeah, so here in Mississippi, the counties have 10 days to certify their returns. Our post-election audits will take place outside of that window. Obviously, they're very busy within that 10-day window, so we don't want to get in their way of closing out that process so Mississippians can understand we've got finality to our returns. And oh, by the way, everyone listening, you've got rules like that across the country. So sometimes you'll see the unofficial returns tonight. And that's typically going to be pretty close, if not the final numbers. But you've got absentee coming in, you've got UOCAVA ballots that still have to be accounted for. So the counties in Mississippi have a 10-day certification window to finalize those numbers. So make sure you kind of think through that as you see some of the reports coming out tonight. But with that, I think we're going to be just fine here tonight. Again, talking to all of our circuit clerks throughout the day, excited that we got these returns, excited that we got these numbers coming in. So we should be just fine. But the post-election audits on the back end, again, will be, we'll be through all 82 counties by the 2027 election. So we're going through taking different tranches of them each year. The good thing about that is the clerks know that we're coming. And I think one of the things that we appreciated today, and even earlier than today, I've had so many folks call and say, Michael, hey, I saw this in the county, or I heard about this in the county. Is that the law? I really appreciate the attention people are paying this year, much closer, I think, than they did in 2020. So with the audits on the back end, we can also tell them, not only do we want you to tell us on election day or prior to, so we can address that, but these clerks also know that we're coming on the back end to make sure that they followed the law. Did they process their affidavits correctly? Did they process their absentee ballots correctly? Did they run an election by the law here in Mississippi? Very important. And I think Mississippians are thankful for that. I know they are because I've heard it from them. So looking forward to that process after the certification window closes down.
Well, we want to thank you for the update, Mr. Secretary, and it was good to hear about all the good things going on in Mississippi. Good luck for the rest of the day and the evening. And if you're going to visit additional polling places, and give our thanks to the poll workers once again.
I'll do it. Thank you, my friend.
you.
Take care.
So next we're going to bring in Nick Lima. Nick Lima serves as he's the director of elections for the city of Cranston in Rhode Island. He also serves on our executive board of the local leadership council, which advises the EAC. Nick, welcome to this update. What we did was we went down to Minnesota. We went all the way down to Minnesota. Down to Mississippi. Now we're back up to Rhode Island. So talk to me about how things are going in Rhode Island.
Well, Commissioner, good afternoon. It's been a great election day. I've worked at quite a few general elections so far here in the city of Cranston, Rhode Island's second largest city. And this has actually been the smoothest we've had in my career thus far. And that's a credit to our poll workers. We've got 320 poll workers just in our city. It's also a credit to some of our general laws that have been updated in the last couple of years. Rhode Island has early voting, and in just in the last couple of sessions of our state general assembly, it was formalized and enacted into state law. Just here in the city of Cranston, we have 61,000 registered voters. Over 12,500 voted early, including 1,600 yesterday, 1,500 on Saturday. That's really taking the pressure off of our polls on election day. And we still opened up every single one of our precincts. I've got 27 precincts operating right now. Polls close in Rhode Island at 8 o'clock tonight, Eastern. It just make it so much smoother and allow people like me to get in my car and drive around and respond to any little minor issues, or imperfections that happen on election day, get them corrected and move on. Because the voter volume is steady, it's busy, but it's not as busy as it would have been if we didn't have those other options for voters to take advantage of.
Well, first, I guess we're going to start out by noting that one of those 7 swing states, Wisconsin, sometimes competes with Rhode Island about who has the better cranberry. So I'm a New Englander myself, so I'm going to be on your side. But would love to hear your thoughts about how the counting of the vote is going to go tonight. You've got all the inputs from before the election, what's happening on election day. But when the polls close, what's Rhode Island, what's the time frame? What's the process that you're going to take forward, at least to think about the unofficial counting of the votes? And what can people look to see if they're looking up Rhode Island votes later this evening?
Well, that's another advantage that we're in Rhode Island, the law is on our side. So we're a top-down state, election administration wise. The State Board of Elections handles and tabulates mail ballots after they're certified locally on the application stage. So the State Board of Elections already has a head start on that. We're allowed to start counting those before Election Day. Obviously, no one knows the results, but they're going to be populated out just after 8 o'clock tonight. The only mail ballots we're not going to know are those that are placed in drop boxes today. Which is going to be a small fraction of the total. It might affect a couple of small down ballot races that might have to wait till tomorrow for those to be tabulated. But the mail ballots going to be pushed out 95% of them shortly after 8 o'clock. The early voting results for the 39 cities and towns, those are going to be pushed out shortly after 8 o'clock as well, pretty much as soon as the DS200 tabulators can transmit at each of the localities. And then our precinct, we have, in Rhode Island, we have well over 400 precincts statewide. Those are all going to be announced, between 8 and 9 o'clock tonight. And we've got backup procedures in place. Obviously, if a DS200 fails to transmit, we've got police escorts standing by, ready to drive the thumb drive, the backup to the State Board of Elections, so we can get that populated, including the results. So I expect a very quick turnaround on the vast majority of our results tonight. But like any election, we've got those other categories of ballots. We've got our cured ballots, which in Rhode Island have 7 days to be cured by voters. We've got our overseas military FPCA ballots, which also have 7 days. So that deadline is Tuesday at 4 o'clock to be received by the State Board of Elections. And we've got manual count and provisionals, which are going to be adjudicated by the local boards of canvassers starting tomorrow, and then added to tallies later this week. So there'll be a few thousand outstanding ballots, I'm sure, statewide. They're going to be known tonight, and I think a lot of the results will be known tonight because of that too.
So, Nick, is there a, could you describe for us a certification process to get to a sort of a final certification, as well as if there's an audit that takes place in Rhode Island or Rhode Island localities?
Yeah, another way Rhode Island is lucky, and the law helps us there. We have a couple of the gold standards. We use hand-marked paper ballots, and those are part of a risk limiting audit. Rhode Island, after Colorado, was, I believe, the second statewide to enact RLAs. So that's a process going to take place as soon as the conclusion of any recounts, which are going to start next week at the state BOE, if there's any requested or any that fall into a margin where a recount would be acceptable. Right after that, they're going to have the dice roll, set the random seed, conduct the RLA. They'll set a risk limit. That's all done at the State Board of Elections, but the 39 cities and towns all participate. They'll select, using that dice roll, that random seed, which precincts are going to be part of that audit. We'll transport our ballots to the state to help participate in that audit, as well as members of both political parties and the public can participate in our audit process as well. And then shortly thereafter, probably right before Thanksgiving, I expect our State Board of Elections to certify final results. And then the local boards of canvassers can certify our local results after that, once we have those official totals for the election certificates.
So on election day, which is important in Rhode Island, especially a busy election like this one with high turnout, you're going to see some lines, you're going to see some backups, and just wanted a sense of how you go ahead and measure and identify where those lines are, maybe in advance, how you think about how to allocate resources, and how you mitigate those problems. If you do see lines developing in certain locations, what are you doing to make election day go more smoothly at the polling place?
Elections are all about logistics and planning, and learning from the past. And we know in the past how lines have caused voters to walk away from the polling place, and we don't want that to happen. We use poll pads in Rhode Island for checking in voters, and at the local level and at the state level, we can see what the check-in rates are. We can see if there's any issues with polls, and we have field technicians, including myself, that are out visiting our polls all day. I've been to 22 out of 26 so far. I've got 4 more to get to until 8 o'clock tonight. Just in my jurisdiction. So, and we see on the ground what's happening, and we can respond to it immediately. It's all about having continuity operations plans in place, having backup plans in place. And we had one of our DS200 tabulators wasn't working right this morning. There was a little issue with it turning on. we had a backup sitting in staging, ready to go, so that machine could be operational this morning. You know, without it actually ever resulting in a line, because there was a second DS200 there. So you know, it's having contingencies in place and then executing them. And of course in Rhode Island, you know, we've had our September primary was just a few weeks ago. Our statewide primary was the latest primary in the country. So for us, that was sort of our spring training, to use a baseball analogy, to get ready for this big election. And because it was so recent, our poll workers already have that fresh in mind. And when we have incidents, we have, you know, minor hiccups at polls, we're able to address them very quickly.
Well, Nick, I want to thank you for joining us today and talk to us about what's going on in the city of Cranston and Rhode Island. Thank you so much for joining us and for your service. Good luck for the rest of the day and evening. And we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you very much for having me, and good luck to my colleagues around the nation, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So our next guest is former North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory from North Carolina. I think we see him. You know, North Carolina is one of the battleground states that the EAC is monitoring. We've had a couple of guests over the course of the day. We've talked to the executive director of North Carolina. We've also talked to some other folks. So, former Governor McCrory, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know if you need to see me. It's not letting me.
Well, we don't absolutely need to see you, but we.
Oh, there we
obviously-
go.
Oh, there we go. We do see
Okay.
you. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Sitting here on my porch with my dog, having a good time.
North Carolina is really on the minds of many Americans. We think it's one of the 7 close states. We're watching this. So maybe you could give us a sense of, you know, what's North Carolina been doing before Election Day? What's the voting been like before Election Day? And what does that tell us about how the whole process has been going?
I'm actually very proud of what's happening here on Election Day, and I was very proud of the early voting also, especially out west. The challenges out west from Morganton all the way to Asheville, out to Boone, Spruce Pines. I mean, total devastation. And what I'm hearing is a lot of people are getting to the polls today, and a lot of people got to early voting. I want to congratulate the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, for getting some temporary post trailers out there where roads were totally destroyed. I think he's done an excellent job. It's good to see him not in the news, which means he's doing a good job. And I personally talked to him a couple weeks ago, and he knew the zip codes where we're having problems. He personally knew the zip codes, and so they were right on it. So, you know, that's quite an accomplishment. And a lot of volunteers out there working. I have a lake place out on Lake James in Marion, Nebo, North Carolina. Marion was hit pretty hard. And one of my neighbors have been working the polls all week, and he says things are going great.
Yeah, we've heard some of the challenges. We did a podcast and we interviewed some folks about what's happening in the Western North Carolina. And it's just, some folks have lost everything, but they've been able to vote and have that opportunity to vote. But the election officials, there were some challenges to overcome that, and the North Carolina legislature weighed in. There have obviously been the State Board of Elections weighed in. But from your perspective, things are going better than you could ever expect. Is that what we're hearing from you?
Yeah, regarding the voting, you know, there are major issues with infrastructure and people getting cold. Thank God we got a little warm weather right now. That's helped. The weather's been very cooperative since the hurricane. We've had very little rain. In fact, we've almost had drought conditions, and we still have warm weather, which the people without heat desperately need in the mountains, because compared to Charlotte's 10 to 15 degrees colder, and it's only an hour and a half away. People have no idea how close this devastation was to a large metro area like Charlotte. So in one regard, we were very lucky. And in another regard, we were lucky at the timing. If it had been a week or two later, I doubt we would have had some major election issues in North Carolina, which would have been very, very controversial. But in Asheville, of course, their water system is still, you don't have drinkable water. For a city of that size, it's just amazing. But I'm not hearing the complaints that I anticipated. Again, I'm not in the loop on everything, but believe me, if things were going bad, people would be calling the former governor going, can you fix this? Because I get that on a lot of issues right now. So I'm proud of everyone working together as a team.
Governor, I know you know how the voting system works, both from an administrative sense, but also you were a candidate, obviously running in this system.
Too many
Tell
times.
us a little bit about what you expect. I think people around the country are wondering, what should we expect from how the results are going to be reported? A lot of things
first of all,
about how quickly things are in North Carolina, but tell us from your perspective of how you think things are going to go with how the vote comes in tonight. Not in terms of who's going to win, but just how quickly we will start to see results compared to other states maybe around the country.
Well, usually we see results much earlier, but we changed the law this year where we're not counting the early votes early to release them at 7:30 or 8 o'clock. So I anticipate them coming a little later than normal in North Carolina, which could, again, cause some suspicion because early voting and mail-in voting, they're not going to start counting, according to new laws, my understanding, until 7:30 when the polls close. So we could see a delay in North Carolina. But, sometimes that's good because it always threw people off because maybe that's going to change this year because the Democrats always took a big lead with early voting. Then the Republicans would catch up and no one understood why this huge variation. And it's just the variation in how people vote, although Republican early voting's pretty strong this year. But again, any analysis in trying to predict the election, which I'm seeing on all the networks, which I'm a pundit on many of those, I think they're doing a disservice trying to guess the election results, because if they guess wrong due to exit surveying, that also causes suspicion. And that's the last thing we need right now. So I urge the networks to cool your jets. You don't have to, you're guessing. I know you're guessing, you're guessing, so just stop it. It's ridiculous. It's like guessing who's going to win the Super Bowl. The pregame means nothing. Be patient. And if you expect the people to be patient and unemotional about this, maybe the media ought to do the same thing. But I know the game. I've played it. They have all these panelists. They've in New York and DC and the candidates. I know what it's like to be a candidate. You're making phone calls to all the people. What's happening? What's happening? No one really knows. You're in the blind, and that's good.
Well, there's one
I'll tell you
reason
another good thing I'll mention. I'll mention this real quick. Yeah, weren't our founders brilliant in making this a confidential vote behind a curtain? I mean, who thought of that among our founders? I don't know the history of it, but I think it's good it's confidential. And maybe you shouldn't tell people how you voted. It's private. It's between you and God. That's it. And in this cancel culture we have in both the Republicans and Democrats, maybe you just don't vote. But that doesn't mean you have to tell anyone how you vote, because these days you might be canceled by your neighbor, your spouse, or your business, your university, on both sides. I'm not telling anyone how I vote. And I'm kind of having fun with that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, former Governor Pat McCrory. We thank you so much for giving us an update on what's happening in Western.
Well, I
North
hope I brought a
Carolina.
little levity to your situation, but
We love
thanks to everyone working on it. God bless y'all.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
So that was interesting, John, the former governor giving us an insight into what he's seeing and hearing, and he has some of the same issues that we are concerned with, and early calls that are made based on unofficial results, that there may be some indication one candidate's doing better than the other. But on the other hand, that's why we always preach, particularly if it's a close race or there's a lot of outstanding ballots, you need to sort of wait till more results come in. There's official results.
Yes, and I also appreciated his praise of the secret ballot, something very important for us. I will note, though, just historically, it actually doesn't really go back to our founding. We started to really put this in the 19th century. So our founders were very wise in many ways, but this was a big reform that went on in the post-Civil War, and really is an important bedrock for people here that we get the secret ballot.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the first balloting was you basically announced who you're voting for, and they basically marked it down, but you had to announce it And so that was reformed.
You did, and sometimes and government didn't really make the ballot. Sometimes your party or your friends would give you the color coded ballot to walk into the polling place, holding it high, so they knew who you were voting for. So if they wanted to reward or punish you based on your vote, and for your city job or for other sorts of things, this was part of our history.
So we're hoping to hear we're hoping to hear from Arkansas, from Belinda Harris Ritter, who's a commissioner on the Arkansas Election Commission. But we don't see her yet on standby. But we're going to move on quickly to Gretchen Reinemeyer, who's with the city of Arlington in Virginia.
County of Arlington.
County of Arlington. What is it? Well,
I'm a resident. So.
You're a resident, so you have all the details there. But Gretchen, are you able to join us?
Hello, yes.
So Gretchen is obviously, she is one of my favorite general registrars and directors
Oh, thank you.
who serves in Arlington. She was one of my colleagues when I worked in Virginia as a secretary long ago. But thank you, Gretchen, for joining us. We want to get your update on how things are going in Arlington and what you're seeing in Virginia. And I know that sometimes the northern Virginia counties sort of keep each other plugged in on turnout and things that are going on, even though we're all sort of our little bubble. Tell us what's going on in Arlington and sort of hopefully Northern Virginia.
Yeah, so in Arlington, or in Virginia, we started early voting on September 20th. And so here in Arlington, we did see around 35% of our voters vote early before Election Day. That's slightly higher than the rest of the state. The rest of the state is a little bit lower, but Northern Virginia did end with around 40% of their voters voting for Election Day when you start factoring in mail ballots. So we did have about 10% of our voters cast their mail ballots already as well. So in Arlington, that's around 74,000 voters, and statewide, it's around 2.3 million voters have already cast ballots here in Virginia going into Election Day. So
I was one of those 74,000 who voted early. Maybe you've looked me up. No, I'm not accused you of doing that. But I did take advantage of that. But wanted to think a little bit about the process on Election Day or even tonight when we start counting ballots. A lot of ballots in before Election Day. Of course, you're having robust Election Day turnout. What's the process for you once the polls close for counting the vote? What comes in first? How do you do this? And maybe some sense of when we might know. I know this is unofficial results. Some sense of when we might know the big percentage of the unofficial vote that it will be in. People can say, yeah, I kind of know what happened in Virginia.
So in Virginia, because we do have early votes, mail votes, and Election Day votes, a bulk of our voters still vote in person at their polling place on Election Day. We actually start totalizing all of those results pretty much at the same time at 7 p.m. So it's just, it takes as long as it takes for the machines to totalize the results and then for them to get added together in proof before we can start reporting them out. So here in Arlington, we anticipate we'll probably start reporting results around maybe 7:30 if we're lucky, but 7:45, and we'll have them trickle in from our precincts in early voting and even the mail ballots that we've received up through today. That'll trickle in through 9 o'clock. Hopefully we'll be done with most of our reporting by 9 p.m. tonight. So, yeah.
Well, that's outstanding. It's good to hear. Have there been any incidents or issues that you've had to resolve on Election Day today, or has it been extremely quiet? Folks all opened up on time?
Yeah, no, it's been a very smooth Election Day for the most part. I think the real story coming out of Virginia after this election is this is our first presidential election where Virginia's had same-day registration, which allows voters to go to their precinct on Election Day and cast a provisional ballot. And I know anecdotally, I heard that Fairfax County had around 12,000 of these same-day registrations earlier today. I know Arlington County already has 3,000 as of 1:30 this afternoon. So we could be looking, and we aren't going to be able to accept any of those ballots really until next week. So we could see as much as 3% of the votes here up in Northern Virginia actually being counted after this weekend. So,
wow.
Yeah.
And that provisional ballot is those for the, or same day registration, and you have to verify them. So there's a number of days that you'll do that.
Yeah, so we'll get them entered into the system, and then the state runs a report to make sure that nobody has tried to vote more than once in the state. And then only then can our electoral board start to accept those provisional ballots. So.
Thank you so much, Gretchen, for joining us. We really appreciate this update and having the input from Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and good luck the rest of the evening. Make sure everything goes smoothly. Thank you
Yeah.
so much again.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Chris.
Have a good day.
So our next guest is going to be Belinda Harris Ritter, who is with the Arkansas Election Commission. We wanted to get an update from Arkansas. Commissioner Ritter, are you available?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Can you see me?
We cannot see you. We did for a little bit, and then there
There
we
I
go.
am.
There we go.
Yep.
There I am.
So, Commissioner, my understanding is that, well, welcome to this update with the Election Assistance Commission. We really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
You know, you serve on the commission in Arkansas. Remind me, is it a 4-member board, a 3-member board?
It's a 7-member board.
7-member.
with-
I was way off.
4 + 3.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, the Secretary of State is our chair, and then there are 6 additional
Okay.
members.
So my understanding is that you visited some election polling places today, and you've done that in the past. But
Yes.
talk about what you saw today and the observations and sort of what you took away from those visits.
Well, actually, it's running very smoothly here. Of course, the minute I say that, you know, something will happen. We had tornadoes in the state last night, and so we had real concerns that there might be problems in those areas and up in Northwest Arkansas. But I understand everything has been going smoothly up there. We have not had long lines here. We had some long lines at lunchtime in Pulaski County, which is our biggest county, and that's includes Little Rock. So that seemed to be okay. We had some long lines at the early part of early voting 2 weeks ago, but everything has gone fairly smoothly. And we have only had calls about a few scattered places where there may have been a little bit of confusion about provisional ballots being given out, or one of the other things I think was somebody was confused about where they were supposed to be, which can happen. But we didn't have any reports of people opening late or anything like that. So since we were having torrential rains when the polls opened this morning, it was very good to hear that everything went smoothly.
So I know that a lot of states, of course, changed some of their procedures in 2020 with COVID and the pandemic, and sometimes voters change their behavior. But I wondered if you could think about how Arkansas is voting today from how it voted before the pandemic. Are you back to normal? Are you seeing the same types of patterns of the way people vote? You're seeing people vote and do some different things. What does Arkansas look like now? Now that we're past the pandemic, does it, are we looking like we were before, or are we doing some new things?
We're looking like we were before, and we've had good turnout. We've had an early vote of about 850,000 votes in the state. We have 3 million people in the state and about 1.8 million voters. So we're good with that. We're about where we were pre-pandemic. As far as anything else, I know we sent out 30,754 absentee ballots and had 25,547 returned. That's way down from when we had the COVID situation in 2020. So
How many days of early voting were there in Arkansas?
15.
So 15 days.
Yes, there's none on Sundays, but we had 2 Saturdays. And then yesterday was the last day of early voting.
Okay. So you had a storm that hit, pretty serious storm that hit last night after early voting.
It hit, yeah, I think early voting was still going on when the storms came in, but the tornadoes were at night, so nothing was open and people were not in line or anything like that.
Well, Commissioner Ritter, thank you so much for coming on and giving us an update with Arkansas. We really appreciate the update and good luck the rest of the day and the evening.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you including Arkansas in this.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. So while Belinda Harris Ritter leaves us, and we thank her for coming on, I see that Dee Kersey from West Virginia has joined us.
Where is this to get
Deke,
off?
if you're able to join us, go ahead.
You got me?
Hey, yes, we got you.
All right. Thanks for having me.
So we have Dee Kersey, who is the Chief of Staff and Elections Director in West Virginia. We've been tracking the tweets of the West Virginia Secretary of State's office, and obviously, as we are able to retweet them. Welcome to this update. What can you tell us about what's going on in West Virginia? How has early voting gone and the absentee process? And now, of course, Election Day. We are now the late afternoon hour. How has that gone today in West Virginia?
Well, early voting kicked off with a big start here in West Virginia. We had lines out the door in all of our polling places, our community voting locations. We have 95 of those around our state. It has 55 counties. And a lot of those counties just have voting at the courthouse. So we had a huge early voting turnout. 25% of our registered voters voted. So that's 310,000 of our 1.2 million voters voted early this year in person. That beats previous totals by 60,000 during the COVID election in 2020 and 100,000 in the 2016 general. So we're really happy about that early voter turnout. And Election Day has been no different. We've had lines out the door, folks waiting patiently. It's been steady. The longest line we've heard was an hour in one precinct, which is an anomaly. The majority of our voters are getting in and out in 10 minutes. So we're very happy about that. And we're really looking forward to see if our good weather here in West Virginia really made a big difference for turnout today. But so far, things are looking up.
So looking ahead, the polls will be closing fairly soon. Maybe you can give us a sense of how things are going to go when the polls close. You've done voting before Election Day, voting on Election Day. Different pieces of the electorate are going to be counted in different ways. So how are those things going to be counted, and how soon do you think we'll be able to see unofficial results, but a good chunk of those unofficial results, so people can really get a sense of most of what has happened in West Virginia?
Well, a good portion of our counties in West Virginia use what's called double counting boards, which allows us to process votes during the day on Election Day and start tabulating those before the close of the polls. And those are for your early in-persons and for your absentees that came in. So in those counties, we may see those results uploaded as early as 8 o'clock, maybe 8:15, 8:30. It depends on how busy they are receiving those returns back from the precincts from Election Day. That's pretty common. We'll see results start coming in to half an hour to an hour after polls close, but they'll just trickle in right then. They'll really ramp up around 9:30. And the majority of our counties are reported by midnight. Every once in a while, we got to get a county clerk out of bed who forgot to submit the results at 1 a.m. But that's few and far between. We expect we'll have results in by midnight for the most of the state.
So, Deke, one of the things that I noticed as early voting was going on and pre-early voting was the need for poll workers. There were a number of counties that still needed poll workers. And so we were happy to assist on sort of trying to retweet that out there. Talk to us about the poll workers and how they've done on Election Day and the recruitment efforts that your office has made.
Yeah, and thank you, Commissioner, because those retweets, they go a long way. I can tell you, we have about 8,000 poll workers in West Virginia, which is a heavy lift. It's the same across the country, but that's a big deal in our state. And counties up until the last day of early voting were actually in the early voting locations asking voters who were waiting in line if they might be interested in getting trained real quick to work Election Day. And sure enough, in Mason County, West Virginia, Diana Cromley, she got 4 more poll workers to sign up, and they were there at 5 a.m. So we were excited about that. Of course, we like the more rigorous training, but they've got poll chiefs in every location. So they had the experts on hand this morning. But so we haven't had any polling locations not open because of a lack of poll workers, and we haven't had any complaints about a lack of poll workers. So we're very excited about that. It's always a rush at the end to fill those last few spots, but they got it done. Thus far, really, the big story in the state has been the high turnout from early voting, and it looks like it's continuing the momentum through Election Day. So we're excited to maybe increase our voter turnout numbers from historical averages and maybe be a little further up in the pack.
So I always ask the state officials because, I served in Florida and Virginia, if there have been any fires that you've had to put out, because that was always sort of to help the locals if there's been issues with equipment or electronic poll books, any issues that you've had to put out today working with your local election officials?
Well, we actually had a literal brush fire in Wayne County, but that did not impede the voters' access to the polling place. There have been a couple issues with ballot proofing. In a few counties, we had ballot proofing errors where the wrong candidate was in the wrong race and it was only caught during early voting. And that's a huge issue for voters having the opportunity to vote for the right slate of candidates. So the good story in all of those counties was that as soon as it was caught, it was fixed. In one county with the statewide issue or with the countywide issue, they got it fixed within an hour and a half, and they reissued absentee ballots with communications and tracking to make sure that only one ballot gets counted. But that's been the big story. The big issue that we've had to assist with is proofing errors that weren't caught until late in the game and how to rectify that. Ultimately, we'll have to see how the results come and what the vote margin will be for the candidates, whether or not they're going to challenge outcomes because of the vote split. But that's to be seen. We're hopeful that everybody who wins in West Virginia has done so by a landslide. And so it's all about training.
Well, thank you, Dee Kersey, for joining us, Chief of Staff and Elections Director of West Virginia Department of State. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So we're going a little bit out of order. We have Alan Ostergren, who is joining us from Iowa. Alan, welcome to the space where we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in Iowa. You've had the ability to track and sort of see what's going on Election Day. As we sit here, it's about 5:15 on Eastern Standard Time. What are you seeing in Iowa? And what have you seen during early voting as well, as we stand poised to provide results in a few hours?
Yeah, so we're less than 4 hours from the polls closing in Iowa. It'll be 8 p.m. Central Time, God's time zone. And we're looking forward to, as I tweeted this morning, at 8:01 p.m., the 2028 Iowa caucuses kick off. So we're going to be excited about that. But it's been very, very heavy turnout. Yesterday, they had early voting at the Polk County Auditor's office just down the street from my office. And mid-morning, the line was wrapped around the block twice for people lined up to vote. I looked at the Secretary of State's numbers as of this morning. 40% of active voters had voted early in this election, which I think is an extraordinary number. I'm glad I voted early. We had 20 days of early voting, lots of satellite voting opportunities. You could vote on Saturday at the auditor's office. And so I think a lot of Iowans have taken advantage of that to vote in person early. So those are good numbers, I think, for turnout. I'm sure we're going to be a very healthy turnout when it's all said and done. Some of the early voting numbers that I jotted down this morning, they had already had 50,000 votes in Polk County on Election Day this morning in the first 3 hours. We opened at 7 a.m. So, for a county in 2020, there was a total of 260,000 votes. They had about almost 90,000 in the box for early voting, plus another 50,000 by 10 a.m. So that's half the turnout they had 4 years ago by 10 a.m. I think that's pretty good. So we're going to have high turnout. There's been a smattering of issues reported in the media around the state. Frankly, nothing that would be alarming to me as an election lawyer. Issues that have to be addressed, the occasional ballot style that's not correct for a precinct and has to be fixed, or there was one precinct here in Polk County where apparently the ballots might have been printed a little too wide for the tabulator to process. but minor issues and nothing systemic.
So I feel it's appropriate to have you here, Alan, as it gets dark in DC, because Commissioner Palmer and I had a conversation with you at the very beginning of the year to help us understand the Iowa caucus program. And here we are now on election
Full circle.
day. One thought, Iowa, of course, is not a state that has very large counties and very large cities compared to some other states, but there really is a variety of places in Iowa, especially with some very smaller rural counties. Some sense of how voting's going in the bigger places and the smaller places, how much early voting, and what some of the challenges are for voting in each of those types of jurisdictions.
Sure. Well, you're exactly right. I mean, I'm here in Polk County, which is Des Moines, the state capital. It's a county of over 500,000 people, a large urban area for our standards here in Iowa. But there's plenty of Iowa counties that have fewer than 15,000 residents. Over half the counties in Iowa are under 15,000 people by far. So, in those counties, I think things go a little slower, but there's still, from what I've seen, excellent turnout numbers in those counties. And, the same kind of opportunities you have there as you would in a big county to vote early, to vote absentee, satellite voting and whatnot. And I've lived in a smaller county and enjoyed seeing neighbors at the polling place and people. It's not quite the same experience when you go vote in a big county. I voted early on October 25th. I didn't know a single person in my suburban satellite polling place, but that's okay. It went very smoothly anyway.
So we'll just wrap up the questioning, just talking about how do you anticipate results coming from the counties and then through the Secretary of State's office, recognizing their unofficial results, and there's going to be canvassing and certification program. When do you anticipate results will be primarily released, and there may be some substantive results coming from Iowa?
Sure. So like I said, the polls closed at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. We did move that up 1 hour. It used to be 9 p.m. And I think the more gray hair I get, I'm glad that it ends a little bit earlier in the evening. It's a lot easier on poll workers as well. I would expect that we're going to see results starting to really come in substantively by about 9:15 Central. Polk County and Johnson County, which is Iowa City, historically have a friendly rivalry as who's going to get their results posted first. I think you'll see probably by 9:15, 9:30 or so, those jurisdictions are going to have pretty good numbers out. Polk County, the auditor prides himself on, you're going to get your early vote dump, and then everything will come in one shot normally. So you kind of just brace for impact and you see those numbers. So like a lot of places, I think we're going to see the results are going to trend a little bit more blue first. And then as rural Iowa, which is predominantly Republican, comes in, the needle's going to move to the Republican column on our statewide and congressional races. That's what I would be looking for. And I think we'll know pretty clearly by about 11 p.m. Central how things have shook out here in the Hawkeye State.
Thank you so much, Alan, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Alan Ostergen, a political attorney from Iowa, has a lot to do with the Iowa caucus, and that's John referenced our discussion with him. But now we're here. It's general election day and evening, and thank you for joining us and giving us an update from Iowa.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're moving from Iowa down to the state of Florida, where all updates are necessary to have the state of Florida. And so we have Mark Early, who serves on our local leadership council. We'll see if he can join us. Mark Early is from the supervisor of elections in Leon County, Florida, which is, yes, that Leon County, Florida, Tallahassee, Florida, where we had Bush v. Gore come from. But Mark, can you join us, or are you able to see us?
I can see you fine. I think my camera's coming up now. I had it turned off 2 different ways. I guess you can hear me well.
We can.
And we heard Alan Ostergen from Iowa talking about God's time zone being the central time zone. You are still in the Eastern time zone, right? Or there are people who are not too far from you who would be in Central, but you're still
yeah, it's not the first time I've heard Central called God's time zone. Many of us know Paul Lux. He's famous for saying that also.
Yeah.
So Mark, thanks for joining us. We wanted to get a taste of what's happened today in the Panhandle in Leon County, Florida, in the capital region of Florida. What is talk to us about? I mean, you hear there's so many sources of information talking about turnout with early voting, with large absentee or they call it mail voting in Florida. And then we have election day, which is always significant. Talk to us about what you've seen from your perspective, and what we can expect tonight.
Yeah, so early voting turnout, I think across the state was just actually tremendous. Our highest previous election, I mean, early voting was about 64,000. We hit about 76,000 early voting, and our size is about 200,000 registered voters, about 195,000. So about half of our vote has come through early voting. We are looking at numbers right now. It looks like the latest update I have is mail voting is going to be about 27%, and election day voting will be about probably close to 23% of the overall total. But really, and that's just a breakdown by type. But we're on track to hit, maybe before we're done, we'll hit 78% turnout here. And I'm hearing anywhere from roughly 70% to the 80 percentile ranges across the state for overall turnout. So it's a very heavy day of voting.
So we've actually had a conversation this year, you and Commissioner Palmer and I, about emergencies. Florida is used to seeing hurricanes and has plans for it. Has a good law that deals with it. And of course, you have seen hurricanes. We talked to some of your other colleagues more recently. Give us a sense of whether you think that there's been any long-term impact on voting in this election from some of the counties that were hardest hit, and even in your county, whether there is some residual effect.
I recently saw the turnout percentages from Pinellas County today, and they were right on track with us, high 70s, looking towards 80%. And they were one of the most heavily impacted locations, one of the, of all the counties we had. So I think Milton especially even, and Helene before that, were far enough in advance that our mitigating plans were able to keep up with it really and communicate out to the voters the different options for voting. So I think likely there's a small hit in some of those most heavily impacted locations, but with a heavy turnout across the state, I think it's maybe a small overall impact.
So Mark, we talk a little bit about the reporting of results over the course of the next couple of hours. Florida does a great job of getting results out really on election night. Hearing you talk about the early vote, that bodes well for a lot of your results being out fairly early. Could you talk about how election results are in Florida and how early vote helps get out those results to the rest of the world?
We're going to essentially let you brag about Florida, and how quickly they can count votes, but go for it.
We like to brag about Florida, but unfortunately, some of our good procedures now were learned from the 2000 election cycle. I was here for then, so we kind of got the stubbed toe and have forced to maybe get ahead of the game some. So by statute, all of the early voting results must be uploaded and reported to the state by 7:30 p.m. local time. Most counties get that done by about 10 minutes after 7. And so that's going to be 50% of our vote, at least Leon, but it's probably roughly the same across the state. Vote by mail, everything that has been tabulated by essentially Monday night has to be uploaded. And that's probably 95 to 98% of the vote by mail ballots. They have to also be uploaded by 7:30. So we're talking 2/3 to 3/4 of the vote likely will be reported before 7:30. And then the election day votes will start coming in. We typically get our first results coming in about 7:15, and usually about 80% of them from election day are reported by 8 o'clock-ish local time. And then, the last stragglers will trickle in throughout the rest of the evening, maybe even up until 10 o'clock. A turnout day like today with the heavy votes, we may have some lines at some of our campuses. The turnout of students, that's one of the big stories, is the massive turnout of students here.
And I can't also let you get going without talking a little bit about many counties in Florida, and you're one of the leaders in this, have adopted a system of essentially auditing all of the votes with a separate system of voting. So you're not only counting these votes, but you could argue you're counting them twice. You want to say a little bit about Florida's process, or many of the counties in Florida's process for doing a full audit in a sense in a very quick period of time?
Absolutely. We love our audit system. It's really taken the state by storm. We were the first county to start working on it in 2009, but from what I understand, about half the counties have adopted this, and that covers about 80% of the voters in Florida. And essentially what you do is you scan it with a second certified system. It's certified at state, local, state and federal levels as really a second tabulation system. So we essentially recount our votes every election. It's just that we call it an audit instead of a recount, unless it's close, and then we do an official regular recount. But we, like I say, we've been doing that in line with our tabulation. It allows us to not only audit the results to make sure that we have accurate results and reliable results, and frankly, we're doing it with a separate system. These two vendors are competitors in the space. And so we're pitting one vendor against another to really make sure that the results are accurate. But since we're doing this audit throughout the election cycle, as the votes come in, we can look at ballot styles to make sure that voters are getting the right ballot. And we found some errors, but we're able to correct it at the at the onset of those problems and make sure that that doesn't propagate through the system. So it's been great. I think when people see it, they all get that jaw drop moment when they see what's called the vote visualization, and it's very impressive. The election advocates that are concerned about not great security and things like that, when they see the system, they are very happy. They love what they see.
Supervisor Mark Early of Leon County, Florida, thanks for joining us. We have really appreciated hearing what's going on in the state of Florida. Good luck for the rest of the evening, and fingers crossed, right?
Thank you very much. Yes, wide margins, peaceful polls.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our next and final guest is Shane Scholler, Greene County clerk from Missouri. Shane Scholler is joining us. He's also a member of our local leadership council and our board of advisors and our technical guidelines development committee. So he advises the EAC on a number of issues. He has the benefit of being a former legislator. He's now the county clerk in Greene County. And he joins us to talk about what is happening in the state of Missouri, but particularly Greene County, and how things are going in Missouri.
And it looks like you're participating in curbside voting, because I think you're in your car, but maybe that's
right.
for other reasons.
Absolutely. Well, I'm at a polling location where we're having some challenges, and in part it's because we have a number of folks coming to vote curbside.
Yeah.
And as you know, that lengthens the line anytime that happens. So we're trying to create more vote stations and trying to get another check-in team out here so we can help the voters be able to get checked in more quickly so they can go on about their day.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's gone on before Election Day, the forms of early voting, the types of turnout, how many people have shown up, and maybe some sense of, 2020 was such a strange year for people. They had different baselines, but maybe what does that look anything like what you were doing before 2020? Have you gone back to what you did? And so tell us about voting before Election Day, what's been going on.
Well, during 2020, as you know, we had a number of people who did cast their ballot by mail or did in person prior to the day of the election. We had a little over 30,000, a little less than half by mail, a little over half in person in 2020. This year, this law was passed in 2022. I was president of our association at the time, the county clerks here in Missouri. We were able to pass no excuse absentee voting during the final 2 weeks of the absentee voting period. And so that just concluded, of course, yesterday at 5 p.m. And we have approximately almost 18% of all registered voters in Greene County that cast their ballot prior to the day of the election. So it's very new for Missouri. We're still figuring out that rhythm a little bit, but it went well overall, though we did have longer lines we would have liked to have seen at some of our no excuse absentee locations, which we had 2 here in Greene County. And so we're going to continue to work to improve that. And then for Election Day, we've only have a couple places where we identified longer lines at, but overall, most people are having a good voting experience here. And in part because we're able to have so many people vote prior to the day of the election, thanks to no excuse absentee voting here in the final 2 weeks.
So you mentioned that you were putting out a fire and it may involve curbside voting a little bit like that, and that's just getting enough resources. Have there been any other issues that you've seen either in Greene County or sort of in Missouri that you've had to resolve those issues over the course of the day? And explain that to the viewers, how you resolve those issues.
That's right. Well, for example, unfortunately, our tabulation equipment is election equipment. We've had some the election equipment jam during the day. For example, we had one voter that folded their ballot over to insert it in the machine. Another one, it looks like maybe they had a soda on it and it tore as it went through. Those things, as you know, cause the election equipment not to work correctly. Sometimes it takes longer to be able to resolve that. Most of them were resolved within 30 minutes or less. One took a little closer to a couple of hours to be able to get it resolved. And we have a process, as you well know. Bipartisan teams are there to make sure that the auxiliary bins open so ballots can continue to be cast. And then those that are cast before they are tallied, at the end of the day, the bipartisan team will come together, make sure that they are cast with that bipartisan team before we close the poll at that polling location. But what I find is a lot of voters, because they've heard so many things about election integrity over the past handful of years, even when those things happen, major amounts of distrust begin to mount. I even had a neighbor who was frustrated that put a post out on Facebook earlier today that I responded to. And it's just a matter of helping educate them. There is a process. Make sure we're protecting the integrity of your vote, because we want to do that every single time a voter comes to cast their ballot. We want to make sure they know that they're welcome to come watch that election concludes.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us, Shane Scholler, clerk of Greene County, Missouri. We appreciate all the efforts you're taking today, and you're on the job right now. So thank you for taking this few minutes to talk with us and give us what's happening in Greene County, Missouri. Thank you.
Hey, appreciate it. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. So, John, that was Shane Scholler, who is one of the election officials from Missouri that advises EAC. That really wraps up our list of folks. We've got, I mean, we got
That's a pretty good list.
We got
We got
through
through a
it
lot of
all. I
states,
mean,
yep.
we Utah, Minnesota,
Right.
Florida, Iowa.
People, some of
Arkansas.
the swing states people are looking at, but other states that people have other important races that they might be
That's
thinking
right.
about, and also just understanding the great variety of ways in which we run elections in this country.
And I'll let you know that there were a lot of other election officials in other states that were on the lineup. They're just too busy to join us, and we recognize that. But we really appreciate those who were able to find some time to join us to get a taste of what was going on Election Day 2024. Thank you. That we're going to sign off, right, John?
We're signing
right.
off, and